already have this, I think. Yeah, I already have this. Maybe that's yours.
She's ready now.
That's yours. I don't know, it's
Copy
an
of it.
extra one.
Yeah.
Do you have this? Because I have an extra one.
This is what I have here.
Okay, we'll just put it here.
Ready? I'm gonna start it if you're ready.
Yes, I am.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
Okay, starting the Safety Harbor Planning and Zoning Board meeting Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 at, what time? 6:46. Okay. Liz, would you do a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Ali Shaw. Here. Miguel Hicks.
Here?
Heather Norton.
Here.
So I had you guys first on my sheet. Susan Case.
Here.
Colin Young.
Present.
Christina Novus. Here. Caroline Allison.
Here.
Samuel Landis.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we approve the minutes of the last meeting, I think Carol Strickland has a few items that she wants to talk about, correct?
Just a couple of personnel updates. For those of you who aren't aware, I am now the permanent community development director. I was interim and accepted the position permanently, so I'll be here for a while.
Great.
At the same time, I did want to let you know that our assistant director, Zane Hussein, is no longer with the city and will be recruited to fill that position.
Okay, thank you. Carol, we're delighted to have you aboard,
Yes.
okay? You're an asset to the city. Okay, let's look at the approval of the minutes of November 13th, 2024. Does anybody want to, are there any corrections or deletions, first of all?
And I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great.
What was the last date? It was,
11/13/2020.
thank you.
Okay, anybody second?
Second. Oh,
Great, 2 seconds, enthusiastic seconds. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, minutes approved. All right, we have a public hearing for an annexation into the city, case number 2024-31, AN/ZO. Property address is at 517 Woodell's Drive. And who is going to speak on behalf of the city? Great, Cecilia?
Megan.
Good.
So before you is a zoning assignment following an annexation for property located at 517 Waddell Drive. So the ordinance number 2024-17 was not included in the backup by accident, and it was printed and included in front of you. So this property is developed with a single-family residential dwelling, and all the surrounding uses are single-family residential. The site is 0.251 acres, and future land use is residential low. The property is incorporated and currently doesn't have a zoning, and all surrounding properties are within the R2 single-family residential zoning district. So we believe that is the most appropriate to assign R2 single-family residential zoning to this property. And then we also looked at our consistency matrix, and residential low, we do allow R2 zoning district, so it's also consistent. The City Commission first reading for this ordinance is scheduled January 21st. The second reading is scheduled February the 3rd. So staff recommend the board to recommend the City Commission to approve ordinance number 2024-17. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Cecilia? Okay, great. Anybody, is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak? Nope. Okay, then we're going to bring it back to the board for discussion. I'll open it up for discussion.
Seems pretty straightforward. It's, you know, something that looks like everything else in the neighborhood, to make it the same as everything else in the neighborhood legally seems fairly straightforward to me.
Okay, any other comments? Anybody want to entertain a motion?
I'll do it. I move to recommend that the City Commission approve ordinance number 2024-17, finding the request to be consistent with the requirements of the Land Development Code and the Comprehensive Plan.
Anybody second it?
I'll second.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Very good. Thank you very much, Celia. Okay, we have other business, potential code amendments discussion. That's, Carol's going to take the lead on that.
I will. So we're here to talk about the 2025 potential code amendments. We do try to continuously update our code as we find issues that need to be addressed, technical issues, and receive input from the City Commission, this board, and the community. So where we are is, I did mention at our last meeting that we did get direction from the commission to hold a workshop with them on February 24th. They wanted to hear input from the Planning and Zoning Board as to the list of potential amendments that were on the table for 2025. So that's what we're here to do this evening. We're not really going to necessarily get into a deep dive in the technical language. We haven't drafted any code language yet, but really wanted to hear if there were any concerns with the things that were on the list, and really more importantly, are there other things that you wanted to have the City Commission consider for potential amendments as we go forward through the year. So we've got that work session on the 24th. Based upon the Commission's direction, we will draft amendments to the code that will then go through a more formal review process to the Planning and Zoning Board and City Commission. Kind of depending on the scope of the amendments that are needed, we'll try to group them within one or two ordinances, but we haven't set a definitive schedule until we get that direction from the Commission coming up. So what I did in the memo was I kind of grouped them for things that are just overall land development code, things that are specific to the CRA, things that are required by state statute, and then for your information, also some stuff, or two amendments to the Code of Ordinances and not the Land Development Code. So this is an overall list. I'll kind of run through them, and I'm going to ask that you kind of hold your questions till the end so we can have kind of a discussion of weighing which ones make more sense to move forward with, or if there's, particular issues with individual amendments. The first is adding daycare to the M1 Light Industrial District. That's a request from a member of the business community in Light Industrial, that they were inquiring about adding daycare for their employees as part of their employee retention. So that's a request that came to the City Commission. A second broad one is regarding alleyway access. This is kind of a broad discussion that was kind of initiated by a waiver request that came in front of the City Commission in conjunction with a new single-family home in the CRD. But it turned into a larger discussion with the City Commission of what is the city's intent with the alleyways in the CRD and some of the ones that are outside of the CRD. Currently, our code requires that if you're going to use the alleyway for access for, say, a rear-facing garage or accessory dwelling unit, that there has to be improvements to that alley. It can't be a dirt alley. Paved, milling, shell, but there has to be some level of base and stabilization that need to be performed by the person that wishes to use that access and maintained by the person that wishes to use that access. So as part of that discussion, Public Works went out and did an inventory of all of our alleys to identify which were improved and which were not. And they're going to be having a discussion with the City Commission on February 24th of those findings. And based upon kind of that context of what does the city commission want to do in terms of assuming responsibility for development and maintenance of alleys, that would drive some code changes. And particularly in the CRD, it is set up so that it is encouraged to have access off of alleyways. And particularly the accessory dwelling units, those regulations are intended to have the ADUs off the alleyways. And if that alleyway is not improved, then you get into that question of how those improvements get performed. The next batch of amendments are to our tree protection requirements. The first three are technical. A definition of a boundary tree, that's a situation where a tree sits right on the property line. And it's not really clear how we address that in terms of the responsibility for maintenance and protection and credit for tree preservation. So we wanted to kind of clean that up. And then also a couple of tweaks to the protected tree category for sweet gums and now Eagleston holly. D is one of a much more broad discussion that was requested by the City Commission and relates to a discussion we'll have in just a minute on the CRA district standards. But what we're seeing as the pace of residential infill redevelopment picks up is we are seeing a lot of mature trees being removed to accommodate the footprint of infill housing. And the City Commission requested that we look at that and see if we're balancing the need to protect our tree canopy with the ability to allow that type of redevelopment. And so that's a fairly broad discussion, but there's community concern and commission concern, and I think concern on this board as well from some of our discussions in the past. Couple of others, accessory structures. This is kind of a technical amendment. There's a conflict right now between the standards for accessory structures, which limit those accessory structures to 500 square feet. And then when you get to the accessory dwelling unit standards, they say they can be 800. And it's an internal inconsistency in the code that we want to correct and make it clear that that limitation of 500 square feet does not apply to accessory dwelling units. Front yard setback for porches. This applies citywide. In order to encourage sort of walkability in a neighborhood feel and front porches, the code does allow that if you have an unenclosed front porch, meaning a roof and supports, but no walls or windows, the planning and zoning director or the community development director can approve a reduction in the required front yard setback of up to 10 feet to bring that open porch closer to the street. What has happened, though, is there's been some ambiguity about whether it applies to a two-story structure. So if you have a two-story house with double balconies and both of those balconies are open, the code is not clear if the intent was to allow that two-story structure to be 10 feet closer to the street. We have seen in the CRD several waivers to have those second story open porches and take advantage of that waiver. They have been approved by the City Commission. But we wanted to have a discussion about what the intent was with bringing that a two-story structure closer to the street, or if the intent was really to limit to just one-story homes. So moving on to the community redevelopment district amendments. The first is talking about retail food establishments in the Service Corridor 2 district. And that's that dark purple along 10th and the railroad track there. It is historically an industrial area, provides for industrial, commercial business service, transportation utility. but it does specifically allow for brew pubs and microbreweries as allowable uses. And the information and the input that we've gotten from the community and the microbrewers is food service is now part of the business model and an industry standard to be competitive as a microbrewery. So we've been asked to consider whether a retail food establishment should be added to the code as allowable as an accessory use, not a primary use, but accessory to a microbrewery. And what that term retail food establishment, it's basically talking about where you can purchase food for consumption on site. It's not a sit-down restaurant, for example, or a drive-through. It's more the model of there's a kitchen on site or a trailer on site where you purchase food and take it, to a picnic table or whatever and eat it. So, but that's currently not permitted and is desired to be added to microbreweries. This is one of the broad ones. Parking and landscaping standards in the Main Street Marketplace District. So it's pretty clear from the design standards and the intent of the CRA regulations that there's a desire to have a continuous building facade, to have the buildings placed up on the street, have entrances on the street, which makes a walkable Main Street. In conflict with that are the generic standards that apply citywide for perimeter landscaping adjacent to the street, which has these landscaping setbacks. So if you've got a parking lot adjacent to, say, Main Street, you have to set that back 10 feet, create a landscape buffer, and it creates a much more suburban feel and kind of interrupts that continuous building facade. We also do not have a standard for the maximum amount of frontage of a lot that can be taken up by parking. So if you have a building, there's standards of where you can put it, how it's to be designed, but if you're doing an infill development and want to place, your parking lot on Main Street, there's not a standard for us to review that by. So we wanted to have a conversation about, as Main Street evolves, how do we protect that urban character without, imposing kind of these suburban requirements. Destination resort development standards, the board will remember last year we did look at a parking lot design and destination resort, and I was asked the question, what's the maximum impervious surface ratio? Awkward pause, and it appears that those specific site development standards are not in the land development code. There are density and intensity standards, but there are not other types of dimensional regulations for lot coverage, ISR, setbacks, those types of things. They were in the code at one time and were removed some years ago. But as we're seeing redevelopment on the destination resort, we wanted to make sure that that unique character that the DR district is designed to protect can be translated into design standards that we can use to review site plans. Whether it's just conventional setbacks or more performance standards, we haven't really thought through, but we felt like we wanted to explore that, whether we should have more specific design standards as we see projects come forward. Lot coverage in TND. This kind of relates to the discussion I mentioned of the tree removal. Right now in TND, there's a lot coverage restriction of 65%. And lot coverage is different from impervious surface ratio. It's limited to the principal structure, patios or terraces, that type of thing, and garages. So you can cover 65% of the lot with that principal structure. When you get to multi-story, you can cover 65% of the lot if that second story is less than 50% of the square footage of the first story. And those standards were developed to control massing of buildings so that you don't have a very large mass of a two-story building. So at 35%, it was intended to provide more open space around a second-story building. But we think it's time to evaluate that. We are seeing, again, significant infill residential development. Many of them are right up to that 65% line, and we're seeing kind of that open space even around the single family, really restricted to the required side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks. You know, they're filling up the whole buildable area. And, you know, we just wanted to have a conversation about that, particularly in light of just leaving the setbacks as open. Is that really leaving room for open space and landscaping and trees and so on? Temporary signs. Temporary signs have a number of different categories. What this is very specific to grand opening, new business and promotional signs, and particularly promotional signs. Those signs require a permit. They have a maximum square footage of 32 square feet and 8 feet high. They have a maximum duration, and they restrict the types of signs, really pretty much to a banner. But in particular, balloons, inflatables, portable signs, and pennants are specifically not allowed. So there's two different requests. One is staff initiated. We wanted to look at the time frame and size for temporary signs in the destination resort district. Because of the nature of that use and the types of special promotional events that they have around holidays and Mother's Day, we wanted to look at whether their needs were different and whether that was something that's kind of consistent with the community's expectations for temporary signs. We have seen requests over the years for banners which are somewhat larger and have a longer duration than that 14 days in some of the holiday seasons. The second is a request from a business that in fact has a balloon as part of their corporate identity trademark and wanted to use a balloon with that trademark as part of a temporary sign, specifically on Third Fridays. And we received a request through the Chamber of Commerce to bring that one forward and seeing if there's any interest in making that amendment. The remainder of them, there are 3 code amendments that are required by statute. For those of you that were on the board about this time last year, these are the same amendments. They were not accomplished in 2024, but are still required to be undertaken. The staff did a lot of work on them, but they didn't come forward for public hearings, so we do need to clean that up in 2025. And finally, really more for your information, the Code of Ordinances, we have, again, sort of 2 requests. One, and these are both driven by the business community. One is about food trucks and mobile vendors. The city's regulations have been in place for quite some time. The food truck industry has evolved significantly. In particular, the concerns are over our restricted hours. And we wanted just at that opportunity to look at other provisions because a lot of other jurisdictions have updated their food truck provisions. And it is something that can be an asset to businesses. So we wanted to make sure we took a look at that. And then the final one is a review of what's called wet zone regulations. That is an alcoholic beverage provision in the code that's used in conjunction with Third Friday. So when that special event permit is issued for Third Friday, it creates what's called a wet zone where people are allowed to purchase alcohol at a licensed business and then carry that alcohol into the wet zone, into the street, and consume it on the street. We've gotten feedback from several businesses that are in the wet zone, that some of the ways that's implemented has been pretty cumbersome. And again, just kind of wanted to take a look at that, so we'll keep you advised of that as well. So what we're looking for is some feedback on that list. Is there anything that you have strong support for, strong objections to? And more importantly, are there other issues that you would like us to take a look at and bring to the commission as potential amendments?
Okay.
I have a question.
Anybody have any questions? Carol?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I just have a couple questions. When it came to the accessory food, is there a definition around accessory food? Does that mean these microbrews and brew pubs that you were pointing out on 10th Avenue, would they have the authorization to have a kitchen in-house, or would they be restricted to having like a food truck out front or a barbecue pit out front or something that's like removable?
That is a standard we haven't developed yet, but most of the conversations I have had have been with the latter, not to develop a commercial kitchen, but to do something that's more flexible. And not necessarily temporary, because food trucks are temporary, they come and go, they have to go to a canteen, but there are other options of sort of detached food trailers that are on site. And that's really more the spirit of what we're talking about. But, not necessarily upgrading to a full commercial kitchen, but just having that ability to provide retail food service to their patrons.
Okay, so is there some consideration given to the business, the microbrew, contracting with like a food truck to come in on a weekly basis or rotating that through? Is that part of the consideration?
Yes, and that's why that's on the Code of Ordinances list as well.
And then with the signage issue, you mentioned temporary signage for businesses that have a balloon in their logos or something like that?
Yeah, it's I hate to name names, but
You don't have to name names.
but it's a trademark of a particular national franchise.
Okay,
And that's how that's how they're known, that's how they promote their business. So we're not talking about somebody blowing up a bunch of balloons or the little guys that, wave in the air. It's a specific corporate trademark that would advertise their business specifically.
okay, so my question there is, when you say a temporary signage allowance for that particular business where the balloon is part of their trademark name or their intellectual property, are you referring to the process of they put it out every morning and take it down every night? Or is it staying out there and it's called temporary because they'll have to blow it up again in 3 days, or?
The temporary signs are limited to the 14 business days every 3 months.
Okay.
The requests that we received, the interest was primarily in third Fridays.
Okay, so this would be a third Friday thing where they would put a signage out involving balloons, and that would be the temporary aspect.
Right.
Okay, and then the resort restriction. What is the consideration around that? Because we just recently had a request to authorize a parking lot put on Veterans Boulevard to allow for their patrons to park. And there's also development of, not condos, but standalone houses on a corner lot in front of the resort. Is the concept there, or the consideration there, not to allow building of permanent housing in front of those parking lots, in front of the resort?
No, it's not. It really is not with the land uses themselves, but really giving staff more guidance on what form that those land uses will take,
Okay.
how they'll be designed, set back.
Okay, so there would be some consideration given to the potential of that parking lot in the front of the resort right now being developed into individual housing then?
If it's allowed by the future land use and zoning, it wouldn't place any restrictions on that.
Okay, and then finally, sorry to, but the wet zone third Friday special event, allowing carry sales. What are the vendors or not, the businesses saying about that they would like us to consider?
Currently, the way that it works currently is they're required to place the beverage in a sealed container and provide, like, particular business provides chips with it.
Okay.
And what they say is, you know, they have a lot of garbage because
Yeah,
the person gets the container, takes the top off, throws it away, takes the chips, throws it away, you know.
okay.
That it's not convenient for their customers, and it's just creating inconvenience.
So what are they looking to eliminate? The disposable container for the alcohol or the wrapper for the food?
It's really more around, are there other ways to implement the wet zone without requiring the sealed container?
Like maybe like reusable cuppage or something like
Right.
that? Okay, okay.
And we're kind of keeping our eye on some of the other, some of these other special event zones. Largo's actually considering one for their downtown now, so we're trying to learn from best practices of others.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Strickland.
I have, sorry, Cole.
Go ahead.
I have a couple comments regarding the signage. As it stands right now, businesses on the side streets are not permitted to put temporary signage out on Main Street to attract people to their businesses. It seems to me like that's something we should consider allowing, as the side street businesses don't have any other way of getting attention, and currently the ones on Main Street are the only ones allowed to have those temporary signs, even though they're right there. So it seems like they don't necessarily need it. I just think that should be considered. Also, wondering what the findings on the master plan studies have been and how they're being incorporated into the landscape design, parking requirement, code amendments, considerations.
That is one of the drivers.
Yeah.
That downtown master plan was completed, I guess, almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
Uh,
Because
so
I know
it-
they were looking at making changes to where the parking requirements would be.
Yes, yeah, that's,
Okay.
yeah, it's to implement that.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, that's a good question. Yeah, should have mentioned that.
Any other questions on this side?
Yeah, I do. So going back to the accessory food use, would that only be restricted to microbreweries? Or would it be any business in that area that's kind of food or drink related in some way?
Well, the nature of the other businesses in the Service Corridor 1 don't lend themselves to that. You know,
But-
the proposal with the microbreweries is, it's accessory to a clientele that's there to consume microbrews.
Right, but it's like I'm wondering, and I haven't looked to see if it'd be allowed, but could somebody open a greenhouse business there, say, like growing food, lettuce or something in a greenhouse in that area? Would that be a permitted use in that area?
Agriculture?
So that would be
Consulting my
agriculture.
expert here.
Yeah, or say a sausage factory, right? I mean, we've already got one of those there.
Sort of that sausage house model.
Yeah.
That's something we can look into. I hadn't considered that.
Yeah, just to me, it seems like maybe it shouldn't be tailored just to microbreweries, but to any business where that's a natural fit with it, so that we don't have to have this discussion again, because the businesses have come to us saying that it's not fair that they can do it and we can't. And then, so these things might be a little interrelated about the setbacks for porches and then the lot coverage numbers. I think there should probably be some consideration given to whether a patchwork of open space is more desirable than a consolidated open space, like maybe allowing for reduced setback on one side if you're, going to open up a bigger single open space somewhere, or, front and back, just some thought to what sort of open space we want to see, and can we tailor things to direct it towards You know, I think having a little more consolidated space, because a lot of what I see is, like you say, they're building up to the limits of what they can, so you end up with these little patches where, you know, if you could push the house farther to the front, you know, we get the better use of the porches. I mean, we had a conversation with somebody the other day, they're sitting on their porch, and it's like, they're like 20 feet away from us. Like, you can't really have a conversation that way, and it just, especially in the, you know, in the more densely populated areas, it seems like we want to push the porches as close to the sidewalk as we can. That's where I'd say second story, you probably don't want to do that because you don't get a lot of benefit from it, but maybe some consideration to that also. And at risk of opening a can of worms, you know, if we are trying to get people to use less of the lot to leave more space for trees, height restrictions might get in the way in some places for that. You know, especially given the recent storms, people are going to be wanting to perhaps raise their house up a little higher, perhaps just have a garage on the bottom of it. And now it's like, oh, you can only have one floor. And, you know, if you're saying if it's bigger than 50% of the main floor, you're restricted even further. You know, we probably don't want a two-story house that fills up the footprint, but maybe we could allow it to be a little bigger if people are going to build something a little more resilient, especially if we put some design guidelines around that so we don't get monoliths, you know, that you don't have just a big 40-foot tall wall there. You know, you've got some step backs, you've got, you know, within X feet of the street, you've got a maximum of this, but if you're farther back, you can go a little higher, sort of thing. So just.
The city of St. Pete has those
Yeah,
in their code.
yeah, something a little more creative that gives people more of an envelope to work with.
For houses that are in the special flood hazard area, we start counting the height from the minimum flood elevation.
Yeah.
So, but there are, you're absolutely right, we have
Yeah.
people coming in and saying, how much taller could I make my house?
Yeah,
Because
'cause-
people are looking to redevelop
Yeah,
and raise their houses.
and what's in the special flood hazard area today isn't the same as it's going to be next year or the year after, in spite of, you know, how the legislature might wish it. The oceans are rising. And the other comment I would make around parking on Main Street, I would not want to do anything that encourages anyone to build parking lots on Main Street, especially in front of a business. You know, we should be doing everything we can to encourage that stuff to be behind the businesses so that the fronts are more pedestrian friendly, and perhaps some sort of incentive to set back the business a little farther maybe and get a few more feet of sidewalk space. That would also create a bit more of a varied facade along the street, as different buildings have different setbacks, just for a little more visual interest there. And, you know, perhaps you could even include in that, you know, if you set back 5 feet, we'll give you X, and, you know, we'll put a tree in front of it by the street or something, so, you know, just to give us some more of that flexibility to get the things that people really do want in the city.
And that does also feed into the discussion about what do we want to do with alleys. So if we want to push that parking to the alley, there's the alleys, you know, the few in downtown that aren't improved that are commercial.
Yeah.
need to be approved.
Yeah, the alley, that actually reminds me, I did want to mention that. I think the issue with the current code on the alley is, it seems that the first person that wants to use it has to sign an agreement to maintain it in perpetuity, which means the second person coming along gets a free alleyway. And there should be some way of, I don't have a problem with the people using it being responsible for it if the city doesn't want to take it on. And I know there have been people on the commission in the past that would have been happy to turn the alleys over to the adjacent property owners. I'd rather not see that happen. But if we are going to make the people using the alleys maintain them, it should be done equitably so that it's a shared, not the first person that wanted it has to take care of it forever.
I'd like to add on to that, talking about the alleyways. Here's my thought on it. I don't think the alleyway should be owned by private individuals. It's a city right, it's a city street.
Yep.
Okay? I think what the city should do, they should look at their budget okay? And they should look at the building permits that are coming in for these developments that want alleyway access and prioritize those people that are applying for the building permits. So there are X amount of alleyways to be improved each year. And that would be guided by the areas that are requested to be redeveloped, okay? So that would make sense. So if the city has a budget of 100 grand a year or 50 grand a year or whatever, then it would be driven by the demand and by the budget, not by, let's just build it because we can. It's, what is the demand? The demand will be driven by the applications, okay? You have the budget, so therefore you as a development director could say, okay, we have that in the budget. City required, the city will maintain that because they'll get added tax benefits from it. They get tax revenue. So it's tax neutral. All right, so that's my thought on it, not just develop alleyways just because you can.
That is something that's come before us as a board for a variance request, where we granted approval for, I believe it was a accessory dwelling unit.
From the front.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that was because we didn't think that they should be forced to improve the alleyway for that access, so.
Yeah, I think there's a little more to that one than
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
that.
there's
but
a little
it
bit
was-
more.
That was what
Yeah.
stands out.
But we would
That was
also
that was
gain.
definitely part of it.
Go ahead, sorry.
No,
But we'd also gain more revenue by allowing the accessory dwelling unit or an ADU to the rear of that property. So you'd have your main structure, your ADU could be in the rear of it, and it could be accessed by the alleyway. And to me, that makes a lot more sense
Yeah.
than just nilly-willy just saying, okay, we're just going to start improving alleyways. No, you're going to do it according to building permit and demand.
And
Budget.
Renee Cooper will be making a presentation on the 24th.
Yeah.
In conjunction with the Land Development Code about the analysis she's done.
Yes.
So I'll pass that along to her.
Yeah. So therefore, the building department would know what could be developed that year.
Right.
And if somebody wants to wait for the following year, that's fine. They have to wait 4 months or 5 months to be able to, their application goes in line. So to me, that would make a lot of sense.
Okay.
And then we reduce all liability on the consumer side or the taxpayer side. Caroline, do you have any?
I like that idea.
Okay.
A lot.
Okay. Samuel, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I was trying to work through, if you want it to be managed by demand, then the way to do that is to let the private property owners invest in it if they want to. But that gets tough if we put our fingers into it, right? Like if we say, you can only use the alleyway if you do this, they're gonna decide to invest in that. That's where to exactly match demand, not with a bureaucratic process of first in line because my application was first, or something along those lines. And in the city, it's hard to be sure, to me, if it's gonna be tax neutral, if the city's going to take on a task it's not currently doing, which is how I understand it. I could be
One-time cost to pave it. Help me with this, Christine, okay? One-time cost to pave the rear alleyway, okay? The maintenance, we don't have snow, okay? Maintenance, you have sweeping it every once in a while. I don't know what else would be incurred on that side, not too much.
Pothole
And once in a
filling.
while, repaving, maybe once every 10 to 15 years or something like that, correct?
As I see it, yeah.
Okay?
Would the city then take on overhanging limbs or anything like that, just like they would the city streets now?
Would they take over what?
Overhanging limbs or brush from other folks' backyards if it's an
Well,
alleyway?
yes, just like they do any streets.
Right, okay.
Yeah, if it's in a utility, the utilities has a problem with it, they take care of it. If the owner wants to take care of it, they take care of it, just like anything. But again, that city could afford that, whatever the budget is.
There is responsibility for the homeowner to maintain the alley, not from a pavement point of view, but from
Clearance.
debris and, to keep the area clean.
Right,
So there is,
right,
and that's the same with sidewalks.
right.
So
But
that
that would
would
be a
not
good
change.
solution, in my opinion. How about on this side of the table? I know you've spoken, Miguel. How about Heather, anything, any
I just, as
comments?
we're
or-
talking about the alleyways, I just had, and this is partially for my own knowledge as well, but like the storm drains, And I know some of it, from my understanding, and I may be, correct me if I'm wrong here, but storm drainage, some of it is maintained by the city, and then others, it appears that private homeowners are supposed to maintain it, or do you know on that, Carol, like is there a standard on it? Because that's something just with the storms, there's been, at least on my street, several neighbors where storm drains, there was backups like further down the road, and a couple of my neighbors had sustained flooding from that. And so, and a lot of people have been asking me, does the city maintain it? Are we supposed to do that? And I was not sure of the answer. So as we're discussing maintenance of alleyways, that thought was coming to mind as well with the.
That's a very timely question, and on the 21st, the City Commission's going to have several presentations specifically on that topic.
Okay.
So I'm not the subject matter expert, but there is a lot of concern about maintenance of public stormwater infrastructure and what's private, and there'll be a really good discussion on the 21st. To be
Okay.
honest.
That's good.
I know that this came up when I was on Code Enforcement Board. There was a business downtown that had a back alley, and it had a drainage issue. And it was considered their responsibility to clean it up, not the city's.
Yes, and I think.
And so it is kind of amorphous,
It
or
is.
it is, the responsibility shifts depending on what street you're on, I should
Yeah,
say.
it sounds as though that was the case based on my understanding. And then there were some neighbors who'd mentioned who'd been on the street longer than we had that, the city used to come and excavate them, and then now nobody's done it, and we never really heard if we're personally responsible. But I know there's areas too where there's some that are open, and then others that are under the driveway and under the pavers where there's, like a tube underneath there. So I don't know how a private homeowner would be able to even access that. So I guess I've had a few questions from my neighbors, so I'm glad to know that that'll be up for discussion. Yeah.
It's very timely.
Yeah. Okay.
Ally, any comments, questions?
It was all good feedback, and be interested to see how we adjust these, so.
Okay, thank you, Carol.
We'll be back.
You'll be back, exactly.
No doubt.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay. While you're there, do you have any staff reports or anything other than,
I
you
do
done?
not.
Okay, great. Anybody has anything else other than what was on the agenda to say? Okay, very good. Well, what time is it?
7:33.
Meeting adjourned at 7:33.